the key felt wrong in my hand. It was the same old brass key to my childhood home, the one with the worn down edges and the little heart shaped cutout. But that night, it felt like a foreign object, cold, heavy, an anchor pulling me down. Inside, the sound of my own 25th birthday party was a distant hum, a life I was no longer a part of. My father S voice, the voice that had read me bedtime stories and promised to always protect me, echoed in my mind, not with warmth, but with a clinical coldness that had fractured my world just an hour before. I stood on the porch, the muffled laughter from inside a cruel reminder of the life I thought I had. My phone was silent in my pocket, a deliberate choice to disconnect from the flood of confused messages. All I could think, over and over, was a single, chilling thought that had taken root in my soul. He looked right at me, and he was a stranger. How can a person you've known your entire life become a stranger in a single sentence? Before that night, my life was a carefully curated collection of perfect moments. I was Lily, Mark, and Sarah's daughter. More specifically, I was Mark's girl. We were two peas in a pod, a fact my mother, Sarah, would often state with a smile that, in hindsight, held a touch of melancholy. My father was a man who commanded respect, not with a loud voice, but with a quiet, unshakable confidence. He built a successful business from the ground up, and our home was a testament to his hard work, a sprawling house with a garden my mother tended to with religious devotion. It was a beautiful, gilded cage, though I never saw the bars. My childhood was filled with memories of him teaching me how to ride a bike on the cobblestone driveway, his hand steady on my back until I finally found my balance and wobbled away, my squeal of delight echoing in the crisp autumn air, him sitting in the front row of every school play, his eyes locked on me, no matter how small my part was. He had a way of making me feel like the center of the universe. When I was 16, I failed my driver's test, and I was devastated, convinced I was a complete failure. I came home, slammed my door, and refused to talk to anyone. An hour later, my father knocked gently. He didn't say, "It's just a test." Instead, he sat on the edge of my bed and told me about the first business proposal he ever made, a spectacular failure that nearly bankrupted him. "Success, Lily," he said, his voice soft, "is just a collection of lessons learned from failures. We were a team. He was my hero, my mentor, my unshakable foundation. My mother, Sarah, was the quiet heart of our home. She was the gentle hand that soothed fevers, the patient ear that listened to my endless teenage dramas. Her love was a soft, constant warmth. While my father's was a brilliant, blazing fire, they seemed perfectly balanced. There were, of course, things I didn't see. Subtle signs that the perfect world was more fragile than I knew. I remember once, I was about 12, and I found my mother crying silently in the garden. When I asked her what was wrong, she just smiled, wiped her tears, and said, "Sometimes, even the most beautiful roses have thorns, sweetie." I didn't understand then. I also noticed how my father would sometimes go quiet, a shadow passing over his eyes when we would talk about his life before he met my mother. He'd dismiss my questions with a wave of his hand, saying the past was the past, and all that mattered was the here and now. I accepted it because why wouldn't I? My here and now was perfect. This real life story of my family felt like a fairy tale, and I was its princess. The fault lines were there, hidden deep beneath the surface, but I was too busy admiring the view to ever feel the tremors. The gilded cage was so comfortable, I never even thought to rattle the bars. Little did I know, the door was about to be blown wide open. My 25th birthday party was supposed to be a celebration of that perfect life. The house was filled with friends and family, the air buzzing with laughter, and the scent of my mother's famous chocolate cake. Balloons bobbed at the ceiling, and a banner hung in the dining room, its cheerful letters spelling out a life I was about to lose. I felt a pure, uncomplicated joy as I walked into the room, a sea of my favorite faces turning to smile at me. "Happy birthday, Lily," they chorused, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. My father found me, pulling me into a hug that felt like coming home. "You deserve all of this and more, princess," he whispered. Later, as the evening was in full swing, my father tapped his glass for a toast. The room fell into a respectful silence. Everyone loved Mark. He was the charismatic, generous patriarch. He started his speech with the usual heartfelt words. "To Lily, my wonderful daughter," he began, his eyes twinkling. "May this year bring you as much joy as you've brought to us." I beamed, my heart swelling with love. But then he paused. The pause stretched for a second too long. A strange tension, like a sudden drop in air pressure, filled the room. His face grew serious, the charming smile slipping away to reveal something unreadable. He looked directly at me, but it felt like he was looking through me. "There's something I have kept from you, Lily," he said, his voice suddenly strained. The festive atmosphere evaporated. You could hear a pin drop. Gasps rippled through the guests. My mother's face went pale. I just stared at him, my own smile frozen on my face, a ridiculous relic of a moment that had passed. "It's about your birth," he continued, the words dropping like stones into the silent room. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, but all I could see was him. My heart started a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask. My voice a thin thread. He hesitated, looking at my mother, then back at me. It was a look of profound regret. "I wasn't there when you were born, Lily," he said, the final blow landing with surgical precision. "I adopted you shortly after." The world tilted on its axis. Adopted. The word didn't make sense. It was a word for other people, for other families, for stories you saw in movies. It wasn't for me, not for Mark's girl. In that moment, watching the pity and shock on the faces of our friends and family, my trust in the man who had built my entire world didn't just crack. It shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The aftermath of the party was a blur of whispers and awkward goodbyes. The house emptied out, leaving behind a graveyard of half-eaten cake and deflating balloons. The silence that descended was heavier than any sound. I couldn't look at my father. I felt his eyes on me, pleading, but I kept my gaze fixed on a spot on the wall. The man I had idolized my entire life had just announced the most fundamental secret of my existence as a party toast. He hadn't just told me I was adopted. He had performed it for an audience. That's what I couldn't get past. The public nature of it felt like a second, deeper betrayal. Why there? Why then, I packed a small bag and went to my mother's side. "I am staying with you," I said, a statement, not a question. We drove to a small apartment she kept at the city, a place I never even knew existed. That was the first of many secrets to come tumbling out. The apartment was sparse, clean, and felt completely anonymous. It was a safe house, a place to escape. My mother was a ghost, her face etched with a sorrow so deep it seemed ancient. A few nights later, in that sterile living room, the second crack appeared. I overheard her on the phone, her voice low and strained. "He is trying to call me, too," she whispered into the receiver. "No, I don't know what to do," I confronted her as soon as she hung up. "Mom, what's going on? This isn't just about the adoption, is it?" She tried to evade, to protect me, but I pushed. I needed the truth, all of it. Finally, sitting on the edge of a couch that wasn't ours, she confessed. Years ago, long before the adoption, my father had been unfaithful. It had nearly destroyed their marriage, shattered their trust. They had decided to work through it, to rebuild, and part of that rebuilding process, part of his desperate attempt to prove his commitment, was adopting me. My existence was in part a penance, a beautiful, living, breathing symbol of a mended wound. Or so they had thought. The pain of his infidelity had never truly healed for my mother. It had just been buried. His public confession about me had unearthed it all. "It nearly tore us apart, Lily," she said, tears finally falling. "We worked through it. For you and for us." But they hadn't, not really. They had just painted over the cracks. This family drama was more complex than I could have ever imagined. My father's calls and texts were relentless. "Lily, please talk to me. I just want to explain. I never meant for you to find out this way." I ignored them all. I was drowning. The two pillars of my life, my parents' perfect marriage and my father's unwavering honesty, had crumbled. I felt utterly alone, an island in a sea of lies. I started eating by myself, the silence of the small apartment a constant companion. I would walk through the city for hours, just to feel anonymous, to escape the crushing weight of my own identity, which no longer felt like mine. I would count the change in my purse before buying a coffee, a strange and humbling experience for someone who had never wanted for anything. This was my descent, the slow, painful unraveling of a life I had loved. One night, staring at my reflection in the dark window of the apartment, a new feeling began to stir beneath the grief and confusion. It was a cold, quiet anger, a tiny, hard kernel of resolve. I had been a passive character in my own life story for too long. In the silent darkness, I made a vow. I would find the truth. Not his version, or my mother's version, but the whole, unvarnished truth. My despair was finally giving way to determination. The decision to seek the truth felt like taking my first breath after being held underwater. It was painful, but it was also life-affirming. I returned to my childhood home one afternoon when I knew my father would be at work and my mother was out. The house felt different, no longer a sanctuary but a museum of secrets. I went straight to my father's office, a room that had always been a symbol of his strength and authority. Now, it just felt like a crime scene. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. A clue, a sign, anything that would point me toward the reality of my origins. I started with his old mahogany desk, my fingers trembling as I opened the drawers. They were filled with the mundane artifacts of a life: old invoices, bank statements, client files. For a moment, my resolve wavered. What was I even doing? This felt like a violation, a betrayal in itself. But the image of his face at the party, that cold, public confession, pushed me forward. Tucked away in the very back of a filing cabinet, beneath a stack of old tax returns, I found it. It was a small, unassuming box, the kind you would use for storing photographs. But inside, there were no photographs. There was a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. My heart pounded as I untied the ribbon. The letters were in my father's familiar, elegant handwriting, but they weren't addressed to my mother. They were addressed to a woman named Julia. The dates on them were from 26 years ago, just before I was born. I sat on the floor, the dusty scent of old paper filling my lungs, and I read. The letters spoke of a deep, complicated love. They spoke of clandestine meetings, of shared dreams, and of an impossible situation. But it is the last letter that made the world stop spinning. In it, my father wrote about a child, a baby girl. He wrote about his inability to be the father she deserved, about a heartbreaking decision made under pressure. He mentioned a private adoption, arranged to protect everyone involved. It wasn't just a random adoption. It wasn't just penance for an affair. It was her, Julia, and it was me. This wasn't just a lie of omission. It was a carefully constructed, new reality built on top of a buried life. The documents in the box confirmed it a hidden bank statement showing regular payments to a trust, year after year, and a copy of an old sealed adoption agreement. The name on the birth certificate was mine, but the mother's name was Julia. This was the key. This was the piece of evidence that changed everything. My father hadn't just adopted a random child to save his marriage. He had hidden his own child in plain sight, raising me as a different person entirely. The power balance in my world shifted seismically. I was no longer just the victim of a shocking secret. I was the keeper of a truth far bigger than he could ever imagine. I was no longer adrift. I had a direction. The victim was gone. In her place, a strategist was born. The reckoning did not happen in a crowded room. It did not involve shouting or accusations. It happened quietly, on a Tuesday afternoon, in a small sunlit cafe, halfway between my city and hers. I had reached out to Julia, my heart in my throat. I sent her a simple, honest email explaining who I was. She agreed to meet. Seeing her for the first time was surreal. She had my eyes, the same shape, the same shade of brown. We sat in an awkward silence for a few moments, two strangers connected by the most profound secret. I didn't begin with anger. I began with a question. I need to understand what happened, I said, my voice steady, and she told me. Her voice was soft, filled with a gentle sadness, but no regret. She spoke of a young, passionate love with a man who was trapped in a life he felt he couldn't escape. My father, Mark. Their affair wasn't a sordid secret. It was, for a time, everything to them. When she found out she was pregnant, they were faced with an impossible choice. He was already married, building a business, and the scandal would have destroyed everything he had worked for, and by extension, my mother, Sarah. The decision for the adoption was mutual, a heartbreaking sacrifice made out of what they believed was love. He couldn't be my father publicly, so he created a way to be my father privately. He arranged the adoption, making sure I went to a good home his own. He convinced my mother, Sarah, that adopting a child would heal their fractured marriage. He brought me into their home as the solution to a problem I never knew existed, loving me with the full force of a father's heart, but under the cover of a lie. Julia's perspective didn't absolve him, but it humanized him. He wasn't a monster. He was a flawed, frightened man who had made a series of complicated choices and had spent his life trying to live with them. He had lied to everyone, including himself. The final, devastating piece of the puzzle she gave me was why he confessed at my party. He had recently been diagnosed with a serious heart condition. He was facing his own mortality and realized he couldn't bear the thought of leaving this world with the lie still intact. His confession wasn't an act of cruelty. It was a desperate, clumsy, and selfish attempt at absolution. I left that cafe with a sense of profound and aching clarity. The enemy I had imagined, the cold, calculating villain, had been replaced by a portrait of a man I almost pitied. The real reckoning came 2 days later. My father, broken by my silence, had left a thick envelope for me at my mother's apartment. It was a long, handwritten letter, a plea for forgiveness that mirrored the words I.D. read in his letters to Julia. He confessed everything. I called him and asked him to meet me on the porch of our family home. When he arrived, he looked older, smaller. I didn't show him the photos of the letters or the bank statements. I didn't need to. I just looked him in the eye and said, "I met Julia." The color drained from his face. He didn't deny it. He just nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. There was no shouting. There was just the quiet, devastating finality of the truth laid bare between us. Justice wasn't about his destruction. It was about my liberation from his lies. He was left speechless, not by my anger, but by my peace. In the weeks that followed, a new normal began to take shape, fragile and uncertain. My relationship with my father had to be rebuilt from the ground up, not on the flawed foundation of the past, but on the bedrock of the difficult truth. We started slowly, with cautious conversations. There was no magic moment of forgiveness, just a gradual, painful process of understanding. I set clear boundaries. I would not participate in any more secrets. Honesty, raw and unfiltered, was the only currency I would accept. He, in turn, humbled by his illness and the exposure of his life's great lie, agreed. He and my mother began therapy, finally addressing the wounds they had let fester for decades. The wider family fallout was messy. Loyalties had been tested, and some relationships were strained beyond repair. But the core, my mother, my father, and I began the slow work of healing. In an unexpected act of grace, one that surprised even me, I invited Julia to our home to meet my mother, Sarah. It was a quiet, intensely emotional meeting. Two women who had been unknowingly orbiting the same man, the same secret, for 25 years. There were tears, but there was also a profound, unspoken understanding. It was a final, necessary step in closing a painful chapter for everyone. My own life began to move forward. I pursued a career in social work, driven by a newfound purpose to help families navigate their own complex truth. I found peace not in forgetting the past, but in integrating it into who I was. My story was no longer a source of shame or anger. It was a testament to my resilience. The gilded cage was gone, and in its place was a wide, open world, messy and complicated, but real. My real life story had taught me that love isn't about perfection. It's about the courage to face the imperfections together. The most important lesson I learned was that forgiveness isn't about absolving someone of their wrongs. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of carrying them. If you've ever faced a moment that changed everything, we'd be honored to hear your story in the comments. Subscribe to Deception Diaries for more real-life journeys of strength and resilience.